Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm your host, Paul, and we're going to be going through the rules for the 2023 Fantasy Formula One season. I'm doing the rules for last year, so that way any listeners who are new to Fantasy Formula One can have some kind of a framework going into all the analysis and stuff we're going to be doing. Once you log in to, and don't worry, I'll do a video once the new season launches and they open it up and allow us to start creating teams and stuff. I will do a video where I walk everybody through how to join and how to pick your teams and stuff like that. So don't worry. But for this analysis portion for last year, everybody can pick 3 teams. And you can just pick one if you want, but I enjoy picking 3 because it allows more variation. You can try different strategies and stuff. And each of those teams has 5 drivers and 2 constructors. And you have to have 5 drivers and 2 constructors. And the reason why I stress that you have to is that with the $100 million salary cap per team, don't worry about the millions. It's just 100 units we can spend. With the 100 units you can spend on your team, there isn't enough money to get all quality drivers, right? There isn't enough money to get the people who will always finish the race. You have to have some people that may or may not finish the race, that may or may not get all your points. And the reason why that's so important is that if for your lower tier drivers, I say lower tier, like your rookie drivers, they only cost about $4.5 million, or maybe 1/20th of your overall budget. But as soon as they do well for them, they might get you 5 or 10 points. If they don't do well, if they crash out, you go -20. And as soon as you have somebody like Sargent last year, who went through a streak where he just had a hard time finishing the race because of something going wrong with the car, something go wrong with him, they just pull him. Well, in Formula One, it's smart to go ahead and not risk the car, but for Fantasy Formula One, it's really, 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 really rough to keep taking those -20s for not finishing. So you're forced with the constructors and with the drivers, you're forced to incorporate some risk. Now, part of what I'll be providing is some of the less riskier risk information about that, but we'll get to that later. You can change. So unlike fantasy football, all right, and this is important. There's only 20 drivers and there's only 10 constructors. Unlike fantasy football, where as soon as I have a quarterback, no one else in my league can have it. Well, we're playing worldwide against over 2 million other people. So we can all have, in theory, there's a non-zero probability that we all have the exact same teams. It won't happen. I did the math about how many teams, and it was in the tens and 20s of thousands, different variations, if not more. But but as soon as all the values change after every race, values go up and values go down. So if I don't get somebody on my team now, next race their value goes up a little bit. Well, I might not be able to afford them now that their price went up. So you do get variation, but the important thing is that everybody can have everybody on their team. Again, barring money, everybody can have everybody. So when I do give this advice, or in between races, as drivers start to get more points and not get more points, everybody can make the changes. And if suddenly you see that, Sergio Perez did great last week and you want to get Perez on your team, you can now. You don't have to wait for other people to not have him on their team. So very important to know. So in between each race, you can move people around your team. Once at the start of qualifying to the end of the Grand Prix, you cannot adjust your lineup at all. You also can't see the other people's lineup. So between the end of one week and the start of qualifying at the next week, I cannot see what anybody else out there has for their lineup. So people like me who have a finger on the pulse of what's going on and try to analyze all the information, we will go through and make changes. And if you listen to this podcast, you can get in on that too. But other people who are just like, well, this is just kind of what I'm doing, they might be a race or two behind. Like me last year, I was really slow to the party with McLaren. McLaren started doing well. I'm like, that's weird. I don't have much faith in it. And I was 2 races behind, jumping on that curve to get McLaren on my team. And I lost out on some money because their value went up. And the reason why I lost, I came in 3rd in my personal, like my friend league, is because I have zero faith in Ferrari. And they started doing better. And I thought it was a fluke. I didn't want to put them on my roster. Somebody else did. Ferrari started increasing in value again. And towards the end, I couldn't get Ferrari on my team. I was able to look at what they were doing with this other team, with this other guy who was my only real competition in this little 16-person league I was in. They started climbing, but I couldn't afford to get Ferrari back and keep all the good players because he had gotten Ferrari when they weren't doing so hot. And he was earlier to the McLaren party than I was. So I had to do a different strategy to try and hope that it worked out, and it didn't. And they ended up beating me by like 12 points out of the 6,000, however many points are all season. I lost by 12 points. That hurt. But this is the reason why I lost by the 12 points, is because you can change, but you can't see what's going on in between the weeks. So, and you're limited to 2 changes in between the weeks, but 1 change can carry over. So if I don't touch my team now, next week I'll have 3 moves. I can swap out 3 people free, but then I start taking negative points. I think it's like -2 or -4 for every additional change. There is a thing called DRS boost. So we'll get into drag reduction system and DRS when we're talking about the actual races. But for Fantasy Formula One, all it does is basically it's a 2x multiplier, or it doubles the points for one of your people. So you get to pick who you want to double the point. Usually you give a DRS boost, your double points, to whoever your best driver is. But you're free to do that however you want. With the changes, we talked about that. I'm going through their frequently asked questions here, and I'm using that as like my outline. Do the prices and driver constructor change? Yes. So I did the numbers. I crunched the numbers on how much they go up or down. I want to say it was like the average, only one driver actually went down over the course of the year. Everybody else went up. So it kind of comes out in the wash a little bit, but if, for example, like with McLaren, their price towards the last half of last season, they had a great return on investment because they were valued so little when they started doing so good, and it just took a while for the price to catch up. And again, not trying to throw rocks at Formula One, but they completely undervalued and messed up their stats for Daniel Ricciardo. And we'll go more into that later, but the way Fantasy Formula One did their stats, they averaged out over all the races. So when Daniel Ricciardo did really well for like the 4 races he drove, they divided the points he got on 4 races over all the races, and it gave him a really low points per million or cost valuation, when actually they should have just divided it by the few races he actually raced. And he was a stronger value than Max Verstappen by the end of the season. Daniel Ricciardo was, which again, can have an entire episode just on Daniel Ricciardo in the future. What are chips? Okay. So in theory, we all can pick the same drivers, and if everybody who has Max Verstappen, when Max does well, they all get the points. When Max doesn't do well, everyone gets less points. So it can kind of come out in the wash. Well, that's why they have chips. And what chips are just tokens, but they're bonuses. You have 6 bonuses throughout the entire season. You can use each bonus once. One of the bonuses is like a 3 times multiplier that you can put on one driver. Another bonus is that you can have an unlimited budget for one race, and then your price all revert back. Another one is you can have unlimited changes in your roster without worrying about budget until the next race, but you have to keep it, not saying not without worry, but you can have unlimited trades without worrying about any trade penalty between now and the next race. Things like that. And that is where the knowing how it works really comes in handy, because as soon as you're like, wow, I want to use my 3X, and this is stupid me, what I did last year, I was like, well, early on in it, I was like, well, I'm just going to go ahead and use my 3X multiplier on Max Verstappen now because he's doing great and he's doing wonderful. It's fine. Well, yeah, but I ended up not using it on Max Verstappen on a race that he was really solid in. He still won, but he didn't qualify the best, or however it worked out. So I ended up not getting as many points, not using it correctly, if that makes sense. And we'll go into how to use the chips later on. But the important takeaway from that is there are these little ways to give yourself an edge or not. And if you and I have identical teams, and then I use my 3X multiplier and you don't, and our best guy does worse, well, now I get a massive downtake and you only get a little bit of downtake. Or if there's a track that both, Ferrari and Mercedes are really, really good at, well, then you can use your no limit token, and suddenly you have Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes and all these rich teams on your team for one race, and you can fully capitalize on it. When I go ahead and put, not me, I wouldn't do this, but when if I misuse that token and I get no Ferrari and Mercedes on my team, and they decide I'll crash into each other, and I go negative 15 million points, it can work against you. So that is how we can kind of ink our way out, and over the course of 24 races, we can get these big deltas between who's doing well and who's not. What is the autopilot chip? Okay, so the autopilot. So we'll go into those. You don't need to worry about what all those different chips are. Partially because it doesn't impact our driver analysis too much. That's more of how to play, and we will spend lots of time talking about the chips and stuff. But when we have the results for next year, when we have the rule book for the 2024 season, I'll go into it ad nauseum. With leagues, okay. So leagues are a fun way. Okay, cool. How do you join a league? So once you create your 3 teams, and this was very confusing for me when I first started doing it. You don't join a league and then create a team. So if you play fantasy football, welcome to the league. You're in a league now, and you make your team for that league. Well, that's not how it works with Fantasy F1. You create your account and you create your 3 teams, and then you go to the league list and you get to see which one you want to have play in different leagues. And some leagues allow all 3 teams to be in. Some leagues don't. But as you manage your teams, that team's performance will be played in all the leagues. And there is one global league that has a 2.4 million people that is like the serious one that you want to do really well, and you can only have one team in that. So you pick your primary team to be in that league. Let's see here. Can you create your own league? Yes, you can. And you can join however many leagues you want. I was in several leagues. There's a podcast I listened to, and they ran a league for their podcast, and so I was in on that. And you can create your own leagues. Like I was in we had a group of us from work. There's like 16 people all over the world now. We got into it when we were all in the same place, and now we're all spread out. You create your own leagues, and there's mini leagues and stuff. But the punchline is, for you, take away now, that you create your drivers, and then the same drivers, as you manage them, play out in all sorts of different leagues. For scores, okay, so let's get into scoring. So for a normal race, there's either 3 practice sessions called free practice 1, 2, and 3. And then there's a qualifying where all 20 people go around the track. Whoever the top 15 continue on, bottom 5 or P16 through 20 at the starting grid. And then those 15 run around. The bottom 5 there are 11 through 15. And then the final 10 go, and that is the 20-person starting grid. As that qualifying happens, whoever gets the pole, the first position, gets 10 points, second place gets 9, all the way down. Ninth place gets 2 points, 10th place gets 1 point, 11 through 20 get 0 points. And here's the hard part. If no time is set, you get -5 points. So, and this has happened before, if a car crashes in practice, or if there's just some sort of mechanical malfunction, or the driver's sick or whatever, teams have decided to, you know what, they're just not even going to play in qualifying, and they'll just go ahead and start number 20. As soon as they don't play in qualifying, or they don't set a time, this happens again, cars will wait until the very last minute to try and get a hot track with hot tires and blah, 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 a bunch of stuff we'll talk about later. And as soon as they get out to make their qualifying time, a car hits the wall, red flag, everything stops, and they don't get a time in. And if you're disqualified from qualifying, it's -15 points. For the constructors, if neither driver reaches the second stage of qualifying, then they get -1 point. If one driver gets the second stage, they get +1 point. If both drivers get to the next stage, you get 3 points. One driver gets to the final, you get 5. If both drivers get to the final stage of qualifying, you get 10 points. For the sprints, and sometimes there is a little sprint race, which is designed, which I have mixed feelings about. They're basically designed to give the paying fans who show up there another race to watch. It's about a third the size of a third of the distance of a regular Formula One Grand Prix. And qualifying, somewhat similar, but for the first 8 places get points, and for the championship, can get points for the championship. For the fantasy Formula One, first place gets 8, 8th place gets 1, 9th through 20th get 0. If you don't finish or you're non-classified, you get -20 points. If you're disqualified, you get -25 points. So a lot of drivers, so there's not many points on the vine. You can lose a lot in the sprint, but it's really hard to make a lot in the sprint. And a lot of drivers, you will find they will work hard in qualifying, and with the sprint race, they try not to lose, but they don't they're not risking a lot in the sprint race, because the sprint race on the weekend happens on Saturday. The race is on Sunday. If you and I are racing and we ball it up in the sprint race, well, now my car's out and I miss out on all the points in the actual race. So I have mixed feelings about that. There will be a lot of it's kind of controversial for me. It is, but that's a topic for another podcast. Now, okay, so the big points in the race, right? For every position you gain, you get 1 point. A position lost, you get -1 point. For an overtake, you get 1 point. Fastest lap, you get 10 points. And if you get drivers of the day, you get 10 points as well. Now for the overtake. Now this is important. Sorry, for the positions gained or lost. Here's the fine print. Ready? And this is very important for the analysis we're going to be going into. Okay, so I promise I'm not wasting your time. Positions gained and lost are calculated on the starting and finishing position of the driver, and they are not their qualifying result. So what that means is, if you and I are in qualifying, I qualify the best, you qualify second best, but I have to change my engine or my gearbox or whatever, I might get a 5-place grid penalty. And so as far as it's concerned, I qualified P5. For the points, I don't automatically lose points just because I took that penalty. Unclassified drivers will not have any positions lost calculated. Instead, they will receive the -20 point penalty. So if I'm starting in first and I spin out and the entire field passes me, and then I start driving again, well, I just lost 20 places on merit, or 19 places on merit. I have -19 points. But as soon as I just hit the wall and I crash, well, they just give me the -20 and they don't compound them. Cars starting from the pit lane will be considered to have started from a position relative to the last car on the grid. So they start at 20. So this is important too. Overtakes are considered valid when one driver legally passes another on the track and the driver passed was not entering or in the pit lane or suffering a car failure or going unreasonably slow. This is cool, and this is where in Fantasy Formula One there's a lot of room for points, all right? So take somebody like Max Verstappen, or take anybody. If I have, and this is why I should say like Daniel Ricciardo did really well. If I qualify number 20 and I pass the back 5 cars, right? Well, I just passed 5 on I passed 5 on merit on the track, so I just got 5 points. I'm nowhere near the points. I'm in no risk of winning, but I got 5 points. Now it's time to pit, right? And let's say I go into the pits and they're getting my tires and an air gun breaks, or it's just a slow pit lane, or I almost hit somebody or whatever, fine. But while I'm in pit lane, everybody passes me. These aren't negative points because I'm in pit lane. Then as soon as I go back out, now I'm in the 20 and I repass those same 5 people again before the end of the race. I just got 10 points and all I did was pass the same 5 people twice. So that passing really comes into play as soon as you have somebody who's really, really good who qualifies poorly. Well, that's great. Like Max Verstappen, the best points he ever scores when he had a couple penalties for like an engine change or something. Or he just, I forget, maybe he just didn't qualify very well. And he started P15. So what did he do? He passed the entire field, got 15 more points, and got the points for winning. Speaking of points for winning, when you win a race, when you win a Grand Prix, the driver gets 25 points for first, 18 for second, 15 for third, 12 for fourth, 10 for fifth, 8 for sixth, 6 for seventh, 4 for eighth, 2 for 9, 1 point for P10. So there's a huge drop off after really after 25, after the first and second place. But the important thing is that as soon as you have somebody who starts like P15 and they climb up and they get, let's say they finish 9th and they started 15th. Well, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, that's 6 points plus the 2, 7, 8 points. There's 8 points they get, but it still is good. But the big points are if you win, and which is why in the 2023 season, when Max Verstappen was constantly winning, everybody got Max Verstappen. Everybody put their 2x multiplier on Max Verstappen, so it was a constant 50 points at least every time. And then again, it's more if you get the fastest lap and stuff like that. And then if for the constructors, if you have a car with the fastest pit stop, you get 10 points. Second fastest pit stop, 5. Third fastest pit stop, 3. Now, just bonuses for constructors. This is important, and we'll go into it again later. But when I crunch the numbers, there are some constructors who just on these little 2.5 point, 10 point bonuses over the course of the season, they got more points in bonuses than the teams and drivers of some of the other teams and drivers did on merit all year. So as soon as you have a team like Red Bull in the hunt, you need to get a team like Red Bull if Red Bull exists in the caliber they were in 2023. Because if you don't, unless you go for just Ferrari or something, well, Red Bull's going to have more bonus points because of how well their driver's doing as a constructor. At least Red Bull's going to have more bonus points for their performance than like a Haas or not Mercedes, but like an AlphaTauri will all year. So it's very important that you get, if there's people who are going to excel, you get on that pretty quick. And that is the points. Talking ad nauseum enough yet? When will you see your score? So at the very end of the race, they basically freeze everything. It takes them a couple hours for them to compile the score, but you'll see a score on your app. And and you don't need to worry about calibrating or counting your points yourself. I have spreadsheets, and even I don't worry about counting them personally. I just copy and paste the results in and run my own statistics based off of their points. But I also run my own statistics based off of placements and timing and stuff, which is why I disagree with some of the conclusions they've made, but that's okay. More and countries. Yeah. Okay. So there's that, and there are the points, and that is the not so succinct nutshell about how fantasy F1 works. It's all down to driver selection. It's very important, and sometimes, man, and that's a great thing about racing is anything can happen, but it normally doesn't. So, and this happened in the Indy 500 several years ago. I wish I knew which year. But, okay, the Indy 500, which actually used to be part of the F1 calendar, but now it's not. So, Indy 500, it's a super speedway. There is a caution right towards the end, right? It's like one lap left, and there's a caution flag. And that forces the whole field to slow down. So, the whole field go into the pits to fuel and basically just kind of, to buy their time, to play it conservatively. Everybody goes in order, and usually you'll leave in order, and it's fine. Well, the last place car, again, I forget the gentleman's name, decided that he wasn't going to go to the pits. He was just going to trust his luck and hammer down. The car ran out of gas a quarter lap from the finish line. After he kept going, all the other cars left the pits. By the time they were catching up to him, it was the last lap. He ran out of gas, coasted across the finish line, and he won the Indy 500. Now, do things like that happen? Yes, they do. It can happen. Anybody can win a race. At the opening lap, I've seen Sergio Perez go out turn one, lap one. I've seen, Lewis Hamilton go out turn one, lap one. I think Max Verstappen even has too. Not recently, but he has. So that turn one, lap one, everyone's bumping wheels. It's the closest a lot of those back of the pack drivers ever will be to leading, and they muscle for rank a lot. Anybody can crash. Anybody can get ahead. Anybody can be out at any minute. Normally it doesn't happen though. So I strongly encourage, and I do this with one of my teams, oh, well, if Max crashes and this person's tire goes out and, well, if this isn't a very good track, then yeah, maybe this person will win. Yeah, maybe they will. And if it happens, you'll look like a genius, but it won't happen. And it will not in the long run benefit you. And the solid example for that is there's a lot of people. So I started rooting for Max Verstappen back in 2020 when he was the young guy who was rivaling, when he was challenging, I should say, Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton for the championship, right? So I was rooting for him ever since he was an underdog. Now that he's on top of it and just won his, third championship in a row, there's a little bit of Max Verstappen hate going around, which is fine. As soon as you're winning a lot, people don't like you. And so there's some people who I'm going to bet against Max Verstappen. I'm not going to have Red Bull. I'm not going to have Max Verstappen on my fantasy team so that way, as soon as he does crash, I'll get a whole lot of points. Yeah. And the reason why I'm talking about it now is because I had that idea. The problem is, at least for last year, and we'll see how the rules change this year, Max Verstappen and Red Bull and Sergio Perez, even we talk about Perez, there's some drama about if he's a good driver or not. The dude's amazing. He still got second in the championship, right? The only reason we're not sitting here with Sergio Perez on our shoulders is because Max Verstappen exists. All right. He's kind of messing up not in a bad way, but he's skewing it. He's skewing the results. Okay. So, as soon as in fantasy Formula One, you want to play with your heart and root against somebody like Red Bull because they're so dominant, you can. But after you sit on the sidelines and wait for 2 races, especially last year, if you wait for 2 races for Red Bull to make a mistake before they do, well, then now you will literally, and I'm not being facetious here, you will be hundreds of points behind. You just will. And so there are two, and that actually is a pretty good segue. There's two different ways to play fantasy Formula One. The first way is like the casual way, right? Maybe you watch the races, maybe you don't. Your friend asks you to get into a league, and so you do. And you want to just kind of like have your good players, and maybe you want to have that one player. You want to be against Max Verstappen, you want to be for Sergio Perez, or you want to, whatever. You have your home team, which is fine, cool, and you probably won't win, but you'll put up a good showing. And I'm here to help you with that, right? I will absolutely give you recommendations as to who the good, stable drivers are. You're probably not going to win the entire championship with them, but you'll put on a good show. Yeah, that's perfectly okay. And if your passion is to have distrust for, or you don't want Red Bull, you don't want Mercedes, or you really, really, really want, Williams or something like that, absolutely. I can help you. I can advise you. We can get the best team that's within that construct that you want. So yeah, you might not win, but but you hated Red Bull and you loved your Williams and you went with Ferrari, and there you go. That's perfectly okay. That really genuinely is. That's how I played for the first year or two. And there's no problem with that. The second way is the way that I play, and I don't want to say serious as in like you're not serious, but the way where you're trying to win, with the way where it's nothing personal. As soon as somebody isn't getting you the points, you're placing for whoever is. The way that is, my countryman, Mr. Sargent, had him for a while, but then it just, the fantasy points weren't stacking up. So I always watched him. I waited for him to start doing well. And sadly, anyway, we'll go into all the Sargent drama later. But the second type of player, the more serious player, is a player that is willing to break hearts and move people around every week. You'll still fall into the same, sort of like, well, like for last year, Max Verstappen, yeah, man, you don't get rid of him. And then eventually, midway through the season, you get rid of Sergio Perez to get on with McLaren and stuff like that. So you make those hard choices, and a lot of this information I'm giving on this podcast will help both people. If you're just a casual player, you're like, dude, I don't care. Tell me who the smart people are. I don't want to think about it. Got it. We'll give you the smart people so you don't have to think about it. And then every few weeks, you might want to change this person. Okay, cool. No problem. But also, we're going to have some good in-depth content for the people who want to get all that information and make their own hard choice. I'm not going to be telling you who to have necessarily, because every week the monies change and different strategies happen. I usually go with 2 strategies myself, and then I have the third team that I can kind of mess around with. So depending on what your strategy is, you might want one, you might want the other. I will give you great analysis and help you give you all the information you need to make the best decision for you. And if the best decision for you is chill, not worrying, then great. If the best decision for you is to agonize over it for hours and hours and hours and hit save right before qualifying starts, I'm your man. Well, that is all we have for now. I will see you next time.